Now, in trying to get Mussolini exercised about the Jewish threat, Taki Venturi was always careful to identify the threat posed by the Jews as not only to the church, but to Mussolini and fascism. The Jews were not simply enemies of the Catholic Church. He would continuously tell Mussolini they were enemies of the fascist regime too. In 1928, the Pope, through the Holy Office of the Inquisition, ordered the dissolution of the Catholic organization called Friends of Israel. Its sin was that in pursuing the church-approved goal of trying to convert the Jews, it called on the church to end its demonization of the Jews. Although the Pope, Pius XI, thought it important to put a stop to the organization and its activities, he worried that banning a church organization called Friends of Israel would leave him open to the charge of anti-Semitism, which he wanted to avoid. And so he insisted that a passage be added to the decree that dissolved the organization, stating that the church was not anti-Semitic. But at the same time, he wanted to be sure that there was no uncertainty among the faithful as to what this action actually meant. And so he called in the, by then, former head of Civiltà Cattolica. It's around the time Rosa stepped down. He'd been the longtime editor of Civiltà Cattolica, Enrico Rosa, who had a close relationship with the Pope. And over the years, the Pope would often call on him to write certain things he wanted to get out to the world through columns in Civiltà Cattolica. So he calls on Rosa to explain the rationale of the dissolution of the Friends of Israel in the journal. Rosa wrote in the resulting article titled "The Judaic Danger and the Friends of Israel" that the dissolution decree condemned anti-Semitism, quote, in its anti-Christian form and spirit, unquote. But, he quickly added, the church had to protect itself, quote, with equal diligence from the other, no less dangerous extreme, unquote. He explained, in the painful struggle against the Jewish danger, Civiltà Cattolica had, quote, always taken care to balance charity and justice, avoiding and explicitly combating the excesses of anti-Semitism, which have now been newly condemned by that phrase added that I referred to. But he said, Catholics could not ignore the great peril that the Jews posed. Ever since the Jews in the 19th century had been given equal rights to the Christians, something the church, of course, had opposed, they had become, quote, bold and powerful, making them, under the pretext of equality, ever more predominant and privileged, especially in the economic sphere. Rosa then went on to blame the Jews both for the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution, and warned that in the face of Jewish subversion, Europe's governments were being inexplicably lax. As a result, Jews had established their, quote, hegemony in many sectors of public life, especially in the economy and industry, as well as in high finance, where they are indeed said to have dictatorial power. He continued, the Jews can dictate laws to states and governments in political as well as in financial matters without fear of having any rivals. And he concluded by saying that throughout Europe, Jews were at work, quote, scheming to achieve their world hegemony, unquote. Now, a few years later, Hitler comes to power. And of course, loses no time introducing his own measures against the Jews. The papal nuncio in Berlin reported the details of the new anti-Semitic campaign back to the Vatican. A boycott had been called of all Jewish-owned stores and businesses, as well as of all Jewish doctors, lawyers, other professionals. On April 7th, 1933, so this is within weeks, really, of Hitler coming to power, a law was passed dismissing Jews from the civil service in Germany. In reporting all this, the nuncio cautioned the Pope not to interfere. Quote, he wrote, intervention by the Holy See's representative would be equivalent to a protest against the government. In this case, the Pope followed his nuncio's advice and remained silent. Strikingly, and this is one of the things that's come up in these archives that I found really kind of amazing, I'm not sure if others will, But it turns out that one of the first people, and perhaps only people with Hitler's ear, to warn him not to go ahead with an anti-Semitic campaign in Germany was Benito Mussolini. God, there's Mussolini again. On March 30th, 1933, Mussolini, again, so March 30th, Hitler only comes to power 2 months earlier, a few weeks earlier. Mussolini sent a confidential note to his ambassador in Berlin instructing him to meet with Hitler immediately. That is, the Italian ambassador to Germany was to immediately, urgently meet with Hitler, and to advise Hitler that his anti-Semitic campaign was a mistake. The campaign, said Mussolini, quote, will increase moral pressure and economic reprisals on the part of international Judaism, unquote. Now, he wanted to be sure, he didn't want Hitler to take offense, even though the whole story of his relationship with Hitler is another one which, at this period, he had his own doubts about Hitler. But he didn't want to seem to be intruding or offensive, so he added, this is Mussolini to Hitler, every regime has not only the right, but the duty to eliminate from positions of influence those elements that are not completely trustworthy. But he goes on to say, but doing this on the basis of Semitic versus Aryan race can be damaging. This is Mussolini to Hitler. And he added another warning. There wouldn't be just the Jews who might turn against him if this were the case, Jews worldwide, but Christians as well. The next day, the Italian ambassador met with the Fuhrer to pass on the Duce's advice. And one of the things we discovered through these recently opened archives is the Pope was kept apprised of this. A note in the Vatican Secretary of State files reports that Mussolini's plea to Hitler, quote, it's now from the Vatican account, was taken and read to Hitler and Goebbels a half hour before the ministers' meeting that approved the law that dismisses the state employees of Semitic race. So Mussolini warns him, sends an urgent warning, but it's rebuffed. Another irony, I won't get into this today, but as some of you may know, this came out shortly after the archives were open, that the most significant person to call on the Pope to excommunicate Hitler was Benito Mussolini. But that's, again, another story. That was somewhat later. This is after he got burned in Austria. No one close to the Pope was more eager to spread the word of the Jews' pernicious influence than the superior general of the Jesuit order, Vladimir Ledachowski, from a Polish noble family. Ledachowski could also be relied on by Mussolini to stamp out any Jesuit criticism of the fascist regime. For example, in January 1936, in the midst of the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, Mussolini was angered by a critical piece he read in the American Jesuit magazine called America. He sent his ambassador to the Vatican to speak to Ledachowski, the world head of the Jesuit order. The ambassador relayed Mussolini's request that he dismiss the Jesuit editor, American Jesuit editor, and replace him with someone more kindly disposed toward fascism. The Jesuit general eagerly complied. He fired the American Jesuit editor, who had been editor for several years, and installed a pro-fascist editor in his place, who at the same time, incidentally, reversed the magazine's former critical stance toward the radio firebrand Charles Coughlin. A few months ago, the same Catholic magazine in America published a book review I wrote of a book on someone else had written on Pius XII. So things have changed, and that editor is no longer around. But it's reading these documents in the fascist archives really it's kind of chilling. At the same time, the Italian ambassador in this meeting where he asked for the head of the Jesuit American journal, he asked for help from the Jesuit order for fighting the economic sanctions that the League of Nations had imposed in an effort to stop Italy's war in Ethiopia. The League of Nations voted fairly serious sanctions. Mussolini was quite concerned about them. He was particularly concerned that they might spread to the United States, which was, of course, not part of the League of Nations. The ambassador reported back to Mussolini on the Jesuit leader's response, quote, Father Ledachowski said that all of the noise being made around the war in Abyssinia is just a pretext from which international Judaism is profiting in order to advance its attack on Western civilization. At the same time, the Pope, partly at the Jesuit general's insistence, was preparing an encyclical to condemn communism. In a handwritten letter in July 1936, Ledachowski urged the Pope to issue a worldwide warning about, quote, the terrible danger that grows more menacing each day. He told the Pope that because the Jews were behind communism, that because the Jews also controlled the world press, people were not being made aware of this. Therefore, it was up to the Pope in his encyclical to make clear that the communist scourge the world was facing was entirely the product of the Jews. Over the following months, as the Pope prepared his encyclical, he sent the Jesuit leader drafts of it for his comments and suggestions. Ledachowski, unhappy that these said nothing about the Jews, kept pushing the Pope to add language linking them to the communist danger. He writes, in writing one of his responses to the Pope, to one of the drafts the Pope sent him, quote, it seems necessary to us in such an encyclical to at least make an allusion to the Jewish influence, being certain that not only were the intellectual authors of communism all Jews, but also that the communist movement in Russia was staged by Jews. And now, too, the Jesuit general continues in this note to the Pope, although not always openly in every region, if you look more deeply into it, it is the Jews who are the primary champions and promoters of communist propaganda. Yet by this time, 1936, the Pope was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the strident anti-Semitism all around him in the Vatican. Next to the line in Ledachowski's letters about the Jews being responsible for communism in Russia, the Pope writes one word, verificare, verify. And when he releases the encyclical, which got a lot of attention, Divini Redemptoris, condemning communism, much to Ledachowski's disappointment, no mention is made of Jews in it. Later that year, so we're in 1936 now, Civiltà Cattolica renewed its warning against the threat that the Jews posed in Europe. In considering the appropriate Christian response, it discussed three possibilities, said there are three possibilities. Best, of course, it said, would be to convert all the Jews to Christianity. But clearly, they concluded this wasn't going to happen because the Jews were stubbornly sticking to their ancestral faith. The second possibility was to relocate all of Europe's Jews to Palestine. But there the problem was, the Civiltà Cattolica explains, both that 16 million Jews couldn't be supported in Palestine, and secondly, that the Jews would never do the necessary work to develop the land because they were, quote, uniquely endowed with the faculty of being parasites, and destroyers have no aptitude and no taste for manual labor. So this left only the third option, the approach that the church had used so successfully for centuries: Jews should be stripped of their rights as citizens. This is what Civiltà Cattolica calls for in late 1936, stripping the Jews of their rights as citizens. In July 1938, about a year and a half after this article appeared, Mussolini surprised many by announcing a new racial policy in what was called, strangely, the Manifesto of Racial Scientists. And you see it here. And as you see, if you look at the first point, le razze umane esistono, all the human races exist. Point 9, gli ebrei non appartengono alla razza italiana. Jews don't belong to the Italian race. To understand, and not only do they not belong, but they are a threat to the healthy Christian Italian race. To understand Pius XI's reaction to Mussolini's announcement of the racial policy, it's important to know that the Pope Pius XI, detested Hitler and had been upset by Mussolini's increasing embrace of the Nazi leader. That was really beginning in 1935-36 with the Ethiopian War, and then with the Spanish Civil War beginning in the summer of '36. The Pope was angered by Hitler's efforts to whittle away the influence of the Catholic Church in Germany. He also viewed Nazi racial theory as in conflict with Catholic teachings, which viewed religion, not race, as a crucial determinant between good and evil. Mussolini's announcement of a racial campaign that sounded strikingly similar to Hitler's was destined to upset the Pope. And Pius XI, known both for his authoritarianism but also for his temper, which was quite dramatic at times, had never been one to hold his tongue when he thought that basic church principles were at stake. In an audience a few days after announcement of Italy's new racial policy, the Pope denounced what he called, quote, exaggerated nationalism. He said there's only one great universal Catholic human race. And then he added, in a phrase that would drive Mussolini crazy, one can ask how it is that Italy, unfortunately, felt the need to go and imitate Germany. That was nothing Mussolini hated more than be called, a follower of Hitler. He, of course, saw things the other way around. This is the visit Hitler pays to Italy, Rome, Naples, and Florence in May 1938, just a couple of months before the announcement of the new racial policy in Italy. So the Pope had kind of laid down this scolding of Mussolini and his new racial policy. This is before the racial laws. The racial laws will be announced beginning essentially early September. So there's this period where the new racial policy has been announced, but Jews are anxiously waiting to know, is this just going to be theory or is this going to be put into practice in some way? Mussolini ordered that no Italian paper publish the Pope's speech. He had his foreign minister, Galeazzo Ciano, who was also his son-in-law. The American press wrote, the son-in-law also rises. So Mussolini has his son-in-law, has Ciano, summon the papal nuncio and warn him that if the Pope would continue these attacks, he would provoke a major conflict. Here's Ciano, and here's the nuncio, it should be Borgongini, as the nuncio. Since 1929, the Lateran Pacts were signed. There was an exchange of ambassadors, and Borgongini was sent to be the Pope's emissary, the Vatican's emissary, the nuncio to the Mussolini government. So in reporting this conversation back, this warning that Ciano on Mussolini's behalf delivers to Borgongini, the nuncio, Ciano says, I spoke very clearly to Borgongini. I explained the promises and the aims of our racism. Ciano was pleased by the nuncio's response. Quote, and this again is Ciano, the son-in-law foreign minister speaking. Speaking of Borgongini, the nuncio, he appeared to me to be very convinced, and he added, quote, he revealed himself to be very anti-Semitic. When the nuncio, Borgongini, subsequently met with his Italian counterpart, that is Mussolini's, the Italian ambassador to the Vatican, who I think I have a picture of here, Bonifacio Pignatti, the nuncio did all he could to placate him. The Pope, he said, was only referring to religious matters in criticizing the new racial policy, eager that Italian racism remain within proper Christian bounds. As for the Jews, he explained, what upset the Pope was that Germany's anti-Semitic measures had been extended to Catholics who had once been Jews. So this is how the papal nuncio explains to the Italian government what the Pope's opposition is. So one of the stories here, I'm just going to be giving you a little bit of a hint of today that I deal with in my book, is how the people around the Pope, as the Pope grew increasingly more apt to lash out at Mussolini and his racial policy, did all they could to prevent him from going public with his complaints. Now, Mussolini was very worried about the damage the Pope could do to his anti-Semitic campaign, which he was planning but hadn't yet announced. He knew that it would come as a surprise to most Italians. It was crucial that the campaign have broad popular support. His ambassador, trying to help him, this fellow here, Pignatti, thought he knew the person who might be able to intercede with the Pope on Mussolini's behalf. And so he went to see Father Ledachowski, the Polish general of the Jesuit order. He wrote, Pignatti, the Italian ambassador, writes, "I went to see the general of the Jesuits because in the past he did not hide from me his implacable loathing for the Jews, whom he believes are the origin of all the ills that afflict Europe." The ambassador could not have found Ledachowski more sympathetic to his cause. The Pope's outbursts lamented the Jesuit head, and there were some others. I just told you the most notable at this point. The Pope's outbursts, the Jesuit head said, were the products of mental weakness brought on by old age. He said the Pope, quote, "does not reason and does not want to hear reason." And Ledachowski added that Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, who was his number two, the Secretary of State beginning in early 1930, and of course would succeed Pius XI and become Pius XII on Pius XI's death in early 1939. Ledachowski says that Pacelli was also at wit's end. They were commiserating with each other about how the Pope had gotten out of control. That's Pacelli. Together with Tacchi Venturi and others close to the Pope, they had been doing everything they could to keep him from speaking out against the fascist government and its racial campaign. Ledachowski tells Pignatti, the Italian ambassador, the Pope no longer listens to him. He's talking about Pacelli. He's no longer listening to his Secretary of State's counsel of prudence here, as he once did. He carefully hides, he's talking about the Pope, he carefully hides his plans from him, from Pacelli, and does not tell Pacelli of the speeches he will give. Those around the Pope, said Ledachowski, were terrified by what would happen if his condition deteriorated further, as they saw it. He urged the Italian ambassador not to let the Pope's rants compromise the Church's good relations with the fascist regime. Meanwhile, not only Civiltà Cattolica, but the Vatican's daily newspaper, this is, I think, very significant, L'Osservatore Romano, the daily newspaper of the Vatican, was reacting to the new Italian anti-Semitic campaign by reminding their readers of the fact that the Church had, for centuries, called on governments to take repressive measures against the Jews to protect Christian society. In an August 14th article, again, the timing here is crucial, the Manifesto of Racial Scientists is mid-July. The first significant laws, anti-Semitic laws, will be rolled out in the beginning of September. So August 14th article, the Vatican Daily recalled these restrictive laws that in an effort to protect Christians, the popes had long championed. And in a passage that would be quickly picked up in newspapers throughout Italy, the Vatican Daily explained that while the popes had always shown compassion in dealing with their Jews, this should not be understood, they said. And let me give you a quote, which is then picked up by all the fascist newspapers in Italy. But to put things straight, this does not mean that the popes had compassion for Jews. But to put things straight, this does not mean that the Jews might abuse the hospitality of Christian countries. Along with protective measures, there were decrees of restriction and persecution in their regard. The civil ruler was in agreement with the church in this. While the Christians were forbidden to force the Jews to embrace the Catholic religion, to disturb their synagogues, their Sabbaths, and their feast days, Jews, on the other hand, were forbidden to hold any public office, civil or military, and this debarment was extended to the sons of converted Jews. These precautions related to professional activities, teaching, and even trade. That's the end of the quote. Basically, what the Vatican daily newspaper did was offer the blueprint of the racial laws that are about to be announced 2 weeks later, when all Jewish children would be thrown out of public schools, all Jewish teachers in those schools fired, all university professors, Jewish university professors fired, Jews kicked out of all professional societies, kicked out of the civil service, kicked out of the military. I have one of the things that happens in early August 1938 is Mussolini decides he needs some way of spreading the word about the need for anti-Semitic campaign, and founds this colorful journal called La Difesa della Razza, Defense of the Race, and which will come out every 2 weeks until his regime falls in the summer of 1943. Anyway, here you see kind of graphic depiction of these racial laws.